Shabbat shalom to everyone. And Shabbat shalom to everyone who's on Zoom, joining us on Zoom. Top of the page. We enter this sanctuary to welcome Shabbat. Within these walls, we sit surrounded by numberless generations. Our ancestors built the synagogue as a visible sign of God's presence in their midst. Throughout our long history and our endless wanderings, it has endured, a beacon of truth, love, and justice for all humanity. Its presence guided our ancestors to lives of righteousness, holding up to them a vision of their truest selves. Now we, in our turn, come into this sanctuary to affirm the sacredness of our lives. May we enter this place in peace. May holiness wrap around us as we cross its threshold. Weariness, doubt, the flaws within our human hearts, the harshness of the weak, let these drop away at the door. In the brightness of Shabbat, let peace settle upon us as we lift our hearts in prayer. I now call on Amy and Jack Friedlander to light these Shabbat candles that may be found on page 120.
These Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them. So may we, our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us find knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our life. Bless all who enter this sanctuary and lead all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu v'mitzvotav v'tivanu v'hadu v'yaseh Shabbat. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, Sovereign of the universe, who gathers us to his faith, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lechad likneh shel Shabbat.
And our service continues now with Dodi Li and Hine Matov, and that may be found on page 129 and 128. We'll first begin with Dodi Li on 129, and then Hine Matov on page 128. And how appropriate the selection of Dodi Li is on this, for this week's Parsha, which deals with creation. And in the Song of Songs, which is traditionally considered to be authored by Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, the Dodi Li, Come My Beloved, is a love poem between God and humankind. Especially the Israelites or the Jewish people. And that relationship of beloved, that each individual has a sacred relationship to God, is expressed not only in this poem, but everyday traditional Jews, when they put on their tefillin, the phylacteries each day, betroth themselves to God. They cite a passage from the prophet Hosea, Ve'erastich li le'olam, I betroth myself to you forever. Ve'erastich li b'chesed u'mishpat u'v'chesed u'vrachamim, I betroth you in loving kindness. V'yadat et Adoshem, and you shall know God. And so this relationship, this sacred relationship between God and each human being, is expressed in the Song of Songs, and how appropriate it is this selection with Parshat Breshit, where God, in the narrative, creates the first human being. And at the end of that particular day of creation, unlike all the other days of creation, God says, Tov Ma'od, that the creation is indeed very good. We continue our service now with Lecha Dodi, again, this Come, my beloved, and one of the great gifts that God has given to humankind, and we don't appreciate it enough, is a day of rest, is the Shabbat. And here we're celebrating the Shabbat as this great gift between God and humankind. We continue now with Lecha Dodi, page 138 through page 139. Of course, we chant the first two verses on 138, and then we rise as we chant the last verse on page 139. You may be seated, and once again, how appropriate the Lecha Dodi is, in particular, the second verse. Sof Ma'aseh, the last of the Ma'aseh, the last act of creation. When we read the story of creation, it is Shabbat, but the Machashavat Tchila, but first in thought. In other words, the Shabbat isn't a creative act, but yet is part in some way of creation, because it is the cessation of work. It is the cessation of creativity. And as we'll learn in the sermon, when God finished creation, we are to learn from that, not that God was tired and God stopped, but we're to learn from that makes the Sabbath holy, as we're doing right now, is a concept. It's an ideal to which we ascribe to, that every human being, that the earth has a divine right to rest and to be treated in a holy way. It's not a creative act, it is a thought. We're going to continue now with the Chatzi Kaddish, page 144. And at the end of the Chatzi Kaddish, we will rise for the Baruch Hu on page 146. First 144, the Chatzi Kaddish. Beautiful. You may be seated. Middle of page 149. Let us join together. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. Blessed are you, Adonai, the one who brings on the evening twilight. Our service continues now with Ahavat Olam, page 150.
Ahavat Olam.
Rise for the Shema, page 152 and page 153. We continue with the V'ahavta.
בכל לבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם והשיבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשקתם להיות הידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם בכל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתיכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
You may be seated. Our service continues now on page 159, the prelude to the Mi Chamocha. Sing the song of men and women joined in understanding and respect, the song of God's miracles and earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come, the song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content, her soldiers home to leave no more, the song of a world redeemed, the song of peace, the song of Moses that celebrates the crossing of the Red Sea, the division between slavery and freedom as a divine right, that is the right of every human being to be free and to worship God accordingly. Page 158, the Mi Chamocha. Amidst every day when we read of all the difficulties and troubles that are in the world, we gather each Friday evening to ask ourselves, what is the vision of where we want to go in light of the endless striving and the endless strife that we see in the world and our communities? And so prayer offers us the opportunity to articulate a vision of what we hope for, and each day to move just a little bit closer to that vision. Let us join in one such vision, the prelude to the Hashkivenu on page 161 at the top of the page. Together, let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, Haporei sukat shalom aleinu, v'al kol amo Yisrael v'al Yerushalayim. Blessed are you, Adonai, the one who spreads forth the sukkah of peace over us, over all of God's people, Israel, humankind, and over the symbol of God's connection to the world, Jerusalem. Hashkivenu, page 160.
Ashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, v'hamidenu malkeinu l'chaim. Ashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, v'hamidenu malkeinu l'chaim. Uvros aleinu sukat shamecha, ushmot tzitenu uvuenu. Uvros aleinu sukat shamecha, ushmot tzitenu uvuenu. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, v'hamidenu malkeinu l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom, aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al
We continue now with the Vishamru, page 162. Shabbat. I learned that melody when I was about 8 years old. And I couldn't help but think, Chris, that if you had lived in the second century when they made the rule against musical instruments being played in synagogues from 200 on, if you had been around to give that rendition of Vishamra, I bet the melody goes back that far. Maybe the laws would have been different with respect to the playing of musical instruments. I've never heard it quite in that sort of was that kind of a Brazilian sort of calypso sort of rhythm there that was beautiful, beautiful. A little levity during the service never hurts. Let us rise now for the Tefillah, page 164. And we continue now in silent meditation, page 170 through page 180. Either you may be seated or stand, as is your custom.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God. My rock and my redeemer, my rock and my redeemer, may they be acceptable in your sight, O may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God. My rock and my redeemer, my rock and my redeemer, may they be acceptable in your sight, O
And we continue with the Shalom Rav, page 178.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Avcha, Tasim Le'olam
Before I begin my Devar Torah, my sermon for this evening, we want to welcome Leonard Rose, Nate and Iris Ginsberg, Mel and Odette Sternberg, Cole and Ellie Appleman, Harold and Emily Fink, James, Shirley, Marion Birkin, Phyllis Feibelman, Milton and Margaret Brown, Martha Adams, and Maud to our services this evening vis-a-vis Zoom. We are delighted that you are here and joining us in prayer. One of the great teachings is that when the Torah describes God in anthropomorphic terms, it does so in order that we can best understand how the Torah wants us to act towards one another. Keeping this in mind, we turn to the first interaction between God and Adam, the first human being. So in chapter 1, verse 26, the text reads as follows: Vayomer Elohim na'asa Adam b'tzalmenu chidmutenu, v'yurdu v'dgat hayam u'v'of hashamayim u'v'abhema u'v'chal ha'aretz u'v'chal charomes charomeset al ha'aretz. And God said, let us make the human being in our image, as our likeness, and they shall have dominion, or they shall rule over the fishes of the ocean, the birds of the sky, and of the beasts, and over all the earth, and everything that crawls on the earth. As many of you already know, I tend to cite Rashi, an acronym for the name Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, who lived from 1040 to 1105, first in Germany and then in France. He is regarded to this day as a biblical commentator par excellence, who dealt with questions of all types that arose from the grammatical construction of the Hebrew biblical text. He wrote an entire commentary on the Tanakh, the entire Jewish Bible, from Genesis through Chronicles 2, and then the entire Talmud. The reason he is so widely cited is because he is giving you what he considers, after reviewing all the rabbinic literature leading up to that time, which included the Talmud, various books of Midrash and Mishnah, the best rendering as to the plain meaning of the text in light of grammatical issues. And so there were often other people who studied Rashi, and they would ask, what in the text is troubling to Rashi? In some sense, those who read Rashi unknowingly invented the game of Jeopardy, where Rashi gives the answer, but not the question. So later commentators, such as Shabtai ben Yosef Bas, who referred to himself as Siftei Chachamim, and who lived from 1641 to 1718 in Amsterdam, often gave the reader both the question and then what is referred to as a super commentary on the Rashi. Not by any means am I a sage of this caliber. However, it is interesting to note that 600 years after Rashi's death, great scholars were studying and writing on Rashi, and today, 900 years later, we study and speak on his work and the questions that he raised and the answers that he gave. So in this instance, the difficulty is the use of the first person plural future, or what is called the imperfect tense, an incompleted action. The use of the word na'aseh, which means let us. So the question is obvious, right? Why is the biblical text, if God is the only, quote, entity in existence, who on earth is God referring to? Na'asa, let us. Who's the us in the text, if nothing else other than animate and grass and earth and so forth have been created? So Rashi answers, L'lamidcha derech eretz umidat Anoah sheyeh hagadol nimloch v'notel rishut min hakatan. To teach you proper manners. Derech Eretz is the way that we talk to one another, the way we act towards one another, and the principle of humility. That the one who is greater should consult and seek permission from the lesser one. But if the Torah had simply written, E'aseh, I will make the human being, we would not have learned that God was speaking with, as if to say, his court with others. Rather, God was speaking only to God's self. If it had said E'aseh. So the reason it is written Na'aseh is that the way that we are to treat other human beings when we are about to act in ways that affect other human beings. So the starting point of the creative act, bringing something new into existence, seems to require humility. We demonstrate that leadership by consulting with and seeking permission from those in a lesser station in life. Humility is the first virtue, interestingly enough, associated with the divine, and is the first teaching of this kind in the Bible. The first lesson of the Bible is humility. It is followed by how the human being was to emulate God's image and likeness through wisdom and through enlightenment. And one way of showing that wisdom and enlightenment is the exercise of humility, to make use of our powers of discernment, our ability to learn, and then to make use of it to create as God did so long ago. Now, when we think of leadership, we think of our leaders. But leadership is more than that. Leadership is ever-changing. Leadership is shared in today's society. We may not think so, but it really is. We all lead one another at different times. We exercise that leadership in different ways. When we voice an opposite opinion, when we disagree, we are exercising a form of leadership. And what the Torah is teaching here through the Na'aseh, according to Rashi, according to the sum of Jewish tradition to that point, is that humility has to undergird our relationships to each other. And think about how all of us are deficient in that regard, because we deal with things on a day-to-day basis and we make decisions even unthinkingly about things that sometimes will impact others. And what the Torah is teaching us here in Genesis, in Bereshit, on the very last day of creation, what is necessary for all of us to live together isn't just some vision of peace and some platitude that we hope for in the future, but the way to peace is to humility. All of us, myself included, are in some ways deficient. Why? Because God is teaching humility, and how can any of us be perfect in that regard? We all have that, let's make a decision and let's move forward. But what the Torah is teaching, what God is teaching us in the Bible, is that humility, according to Jewish tradition, is the beginning of creation. It is the first virtue, the midah, that is taught in the Torah. And when we exercise it, when we deeply feel it, and are genuine in its practice, everyone, not just someone who has a title of leadership, but everyone who is in that process, when we exercise humility, we are reflecting the image and likeness of a God we often associate with power. But the Torah is teaching us that the exercise of power, the exercise of what we have a, quote, right to do to each other in relationship, must begin with humility. And that, I submit, is part of the path towards what we all seek, which is shalom, peace and wholeness of life. Amen. Our service continues now with the Misha Berach prayer page 371.
Please join in. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen.
Rhoda Bennett, Paul Bradley, Bobby Davis, Harold Fink, Charmaine Mosier, Bruce Mosier, Mark Schoenfeld, Mark Siegel. Now turn to those in Zoom to unmute yourselves and say the names of those in need of healing. Turn now to members in the congregation.
Mary Anthony Hatzis.
Hayden Roland. Bless those in need of healing with refuah Shema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Please rise for the Olenu on page 586.
The
You may be seated. This week, we observe the yahrzeits of Doris Seelig, Leonard Sakin, Gazella Kelly, Leon Mishkin, Elaine Homanoff-Sokol, Bessie Friedlander, Marie Silberstein Herman, and John C. LeMay. Is there anyone observing a yahrzeit or saying Kaddish for someone who they wish to remember at this time? We'll begin with the congregation. We turn now to the people on Zoom to unmute yourselves and recite the names of anyone who is observing a yahrzeit or saying Kaddish for someone. In solemn testimony to that unbroken faith which links generations one to another, please rise for the recitation of the Kaddish, page 598. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, v'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, bagala uvizman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach leolam u'lalmei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitala v'yitalal, shemei dekudsha b'richu, li'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata, da'amiran v'yalma v'imru amen. V'hei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May God, who establisheth peace unto the heavens, grant peace and comfort in the hearts of all who mourn, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. I now want to call upon our President, Gil Layden, who will deliver the greetings and announcements for this evening.
Shabbat Shalom, friends. Rabbi, thank you for that thought-provoking sermon and helping us observe Shabbat in the manner it should be, and also, of course, the transcendent music of Molly and Christopher. It never gets tiring. Thank you for that. This was the first of a series of sermons that the rabbi is planning to continue tomorrow morning, which will be at 10 o'clock a.m. will be our monthly Shabbat service. And the sermon topic is exploring the Torah's depiction of human nature at the outset of creation. And that service will commence at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Torah study will be from 5:30 to 6:45. on Wednesday, October the 6th, and that will be concerned chapter 2, creation, and the Torah's emphasis on human relationships. And of course, if you have any trouble connecting via Zoom, you can contact Nate Ginsburg at Howard Silverman, and there's more detail on that in the connotes which came out yesterday. And as a reminder from the Public Communications Committee, we do want your good news. So please email us any good news, anything you want to share with us, family, whatever. We definitely want to put in the bulletin or any other
messaging that we do. And from our master gardener, Larry Miller, he wants to paint the temple's lawn yellow for our next anniversary and order any yellow daffodil bundles. And there's a site listed in the kind notes, and hopefully they will bloom in time for our 178th anniversary. I had to think about that for a minute, which will be in January 2022. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. I feel a need to put a footnote on my sermon. And the footnote that when I give a sermon, it is directed at everyone. I know I talked about leadership. It's directed at all of us. It's directed at human nature. All of us have this human nature of really a need to reflect and to think about the importance of the lesson of today. It was not, I want to be very clear as a footnote, wasn't directed at, none of my sermons are directed at any one or any group specifically. I try very hard not to do that. And so the purpose of that sermon was, as our president noted, was a discussion of human nature. And the most important lesson is, what is it through the lens of our great sages? How did they view the text in terms of lessons that it was being taught? How is it that through God we learn how to treat one another? What are the virtues? So I want to just make sure that that piece is very, very clear. Okay. We're now going to continue with the Kiddush, with the traditional Kiddush this time, I see. We will suspend the Kurt Weill rendition this week and perhaps next week, just so you'll want it that much more the next time we do it. Okay, so please rise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagofen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu. Shabbat Pajo B'Yavahu Ratzon Ninchilanu Zikaron L'Maaseh L'Reishi Yom Techila L'Mikvarei Kodesh Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim Kivanu V'Acharta Yotanu Kidashta Tekonim Shabbat Kodecha Yahava Uveratzon Ninkatanu Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Okay, you can finish it. I didn't pour much in there this week. I was shy on the Kiddush. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, we give thanks to God for bread. Our voices rise in song together, as our joyful prayer is said. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. You may be seated. We're going to conclude our service with Adon Olam. Since I have my guitar here, I have to use it for something. Just that Chris's pianism is so beautiful and Molly's voice is so beautiful that the guitar sometimes seems superfluous. I think it's, I get more spiritually out of listening to the two of you. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra V'yet Nasa V'chefzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra. Together, page 625. V'yacharei kichlot hakol Levado yimloch nora V'hu haya v'hu hoveh V'hu yiyeh b'tifara. V'hu echad v'yein sheni L'hamshil lo le'achbira B'li reshit b'li taklit V'lo ha'oz v'ha'misra V'hu eli v'chai go'ali V'tzurchev libi yitzara V'hu nisi umanos li Menat kosi biyom ekra. Biyado afkid ruchi B'yeti shan bi'a'ira V'im ruchi geviati Adonai li v'lo ira Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra V'yet Nasa V'chefzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Shabbat Shalom.